The Utica sunset. The sun is setting over Utica, and the light is extraordinary tonight, golden and amber, bleeding through the dust that hangs perpetually in the air of this North African city. It's the kind of light that makes even the most weathered stones appear beautiful, transforming the mundane into something almost sacred. You know this feeling, don't you? When the day's battles are done, when the last meeting has ended and the final email sent, and you find yourself in that strange twilight hour, that moment when the weight you carry seems both heavier and somehow more bearable, when the very air around you feels charged with possibility and ending both. This is 46 BCE, and Utica clings to the edge of the known world like a thought that refuses to let go. The city sprawls along the Mediterranean coast, its whitewashed buildings catching the last rays of sun, while beyond the walls, the desert stretches endlessly into uncertainty. It's a place of merchants and exiles, of last chances and new beginnings. Tonight, it feels like the edge of everything. In a modest house near the city's center, a man sits in his study, surrounded by scrolls. Marcus Porcius Cato, though here, now, such formal names feel almost absurd. Here he is, simply a man who has carried the weight of principle through a world that seems increasingly hostile to such burdens. The same weight, perhaps, that keeps you awake at 2 a.m., wondering if what you're building will survive the forces arrayed against it. The room is sparse, deliberately so. A simple wooden table, worn smooth by years of use. A chair that has known better days. Scrolls arranged with the precision of someone who finds order in small things when larger things spiral beyond control. The only luxury, if you can call it that, is the window, large enough to frame the dying light, to let in the sounds of a city that doesn't yet know what tomorrow will bring. Cato's hands rest flat on the table before him. They are the hands of someone who has never been afraid of work, marked by decades of holding reins, gripping sword hilts, writing letters that carried the weight of the Republic's future. Tonight, they are perfectly still. Outside, the sounds of Utica drift through the window like fragments of a conversation you can't quite follow. The clatter of cartwheels on stone. A merchant calling out the last bargains of the day. Children laughing somewhere in the distance, their voices bright against the gathering dusk. And underneath it all, something else. A tension that hums just below the surface of ordinary life. You hear footsteps in the corridor outside the study, soft, measured steps that belong to someone who has learned to read moods in the fall of sandals on stone. The door opens without a knock, the privilege of long service and deeper understanding. Master. The voice belongs to Butas, Cato's personal servant, a man whose loyalty has outlasted empires and whose discretion has been tested by decades of political storms. The evening meal is prepared. Cato doesn't turn from the window. Thank you, Butas. In a moment. There's something in his tone, not dismissal, but a kind of gentle distance. The voice of someone whose thoughts are traveling roads that others cannot follow. Butas recognizes it, as you might recognize the sound of your own mind when it's wrestling with decisions that will reshape everything you've built. The men are asking about tomorrow's plans, Butas says quietly. They want to know. They want to know if we fight or flee. Cato's voice carries no judgment, only the weariness of someone who has answered such questions too many times. Tell them we will speak of it after the meal. Tonight, let them rest in uncertainty rather than despair. Butas withdraws, and the study returns to its careful quiet. But outside, Utica continues its evening dance of survival and hope. In the marketplace, vendors pack away goods that may or may not find buyers tomorrow. In the taverns, Roman exiles drink wine that tastes of home and speak in careful whispers about a man named Caesar, whose armies grow closer with each passing day. You understand this feeling, don't you? This sense of standing at the edge of something vast and unchangeable. When the thing you've built, the principles you've defended, the vision you've carried, when all of it seems to hang by threads so fine that even breathing might snap them. The light outside has deepened now, painting the walls of the study in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere in the city, a dog barks. Somewhere else, a woman sings a lullaby in a language that predates Rome, predates the very idea of empire. The eternal sounds of life continuing, despite the weight of history pressing down upon it. Cato rises from his chair, slowly, as if testing the solidity of the ground beneath his feet. He moves to the window and looks out over the city he has come to know too well. Utica the practical. Utica the survivor. Utica the last refuge of men who carry burdens too heavy for their shoulders, but too precious to set down. In the streets below, torches are beginning to flicker to life. Each flame a small act of defiance against the approaching darkness. Each light a declaration that whatever tomorrow brings, tonight there is still warmth, still the possibility of shelter, still the stubborn human insistence that some things are worth preserving. What are we building? The question seems to hang in the air like incense, though Cato has not spoken it aloud. It's the question that haunts every leader who has ever stood at a crossroads between principle and survival. The question that keeps you awake when your body craves rest, but your mind refuses to stop calculating, planning, worrying. From somewhere in the house comes the soft sound of preparations for the evening meal. The clink of pottery, the murmur of servants going about their ancient duties. Life insisting on its small rituals even as the larger world reshapes itself around them. There's something almost sacred in these sounds, the persistence of the ordinary in the face of the extraordinary. A knock at the front door echoes through the house, firm, urgent, but not panicked. The knock of someone who brings news but has not yet decided whether it's good or ill. Voices in the courtyard, but as speaking in low tones with someone whose sandals carry the dust of hard travel. Cato doesn't move from the window. He has learned over the years that news finds its way to those who need to hear it. Rushing toward it changes nothing except the moment when uncertainty becomes certainty. And sometimes uncertainty is a gift. The last few moments when all possibilities still exist, when the weight you carry hasn't yet grown heavier. The sunset has deepened now into something almost purple, shot through with gold like veins of precious metal in ordinary stone. The kind of beauty that makes you pause despite yourself, despite the urgency of everything else demanding your attention. Beauty that reminds you why the weight is worth carrying, why what you're building matters even when, especially when, the odds seem impossible. Footsteps again in the corridor, Butas returning, but not alone this time. Two sets of feet moving with the careful rhythm of men who understand that some conversations can reshape the world. "Master," Butas says from the doorway. "Marcus Favonius has arrived." Favonius. The name carries weight in this small room, in this dying light. A friend, a fellow exile, a man who has chosen the same impossible path of principle in a world that rewards pragmatism. Someone who understands the particular loneliness of leadership when the cause you serve seems to be crumbling beneath your feet. Cato turns from the window at last. In the amber light, his face shows the marks of every decision, every sleepless night, every moment when he chose the harder path because it was the right one. It's a face you might recognize in your own mirror during those 3 a.m. moments when you wonder if the weight you carry is worth the cost. "Marcus," he says simply, "you bring news from the coast." It's not a question. Men like Favonius don't travel through hostile territory to share pleasantries. They come bearing the kind of information that forces decisions, that transforms possibility into inevitability. Favonius steps into the study, and even in the gentle light, you can see the dust of hard travel on his clothes. The weariness that comes not just from physical exertion, but from carrying knowledge that weighs more than any pack. "Caesar's ships were sighted at dawn," he says without preamble. 3 days, perhaps 4, and his legions will be at our gates." The words hang in the air like smoke from an extinguished flame. Outside, Utica continues its evening rituals, unaware that the conversation in this modest study is about to determine whether those rituals will continue tomorrow, or next week, or ever again. Cato nods slowly, as if the news confirms something he has long suspected. There's no surprise in his expression, no shock or fear, only the quiet acceptance of someone who has always known that this moment would come, who has spent years preparing not for victory, but for the choice that victory's absence would demand. "Then we have tonight," he says simply, "and tonight is enough for what must be decided." The sun has nearly disappeared now, leaving only the faintest trace of gold along the horizon. Soon, the stars will emerge over Utica, the same stars that have watched empires rise and fall, that have seen countless leaders wrestle with the weight of impossible choices. And in this small room, as darkness gathers around the last light of day, Two men who have carried the burden of principle through a world hostile to such weight prepare to face the question that every leader must eventually answer. What price are you willing to pay for what you believe? The evening meal waits. The city settles into its rhythms of night, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the future approaches with the inexorable patience of the tide. Reflections in the study. The lamp flame wavers as Cato moves through his study, his sandals soft against the worn stone floor. The scrolls that line these walls have been his companions for decades. Works of philosophy and law, history and poetry, the accumulated wisdom of minds that grappled with questions that seem to have no easy answers. Tonight, they feel less like sources of guidance and more like witnesses to the end of an age. You know this feeling, don't you? When you stand in your office late at night, surrounded by the artifacts of what you're building. The whiteboards covered in strategy, the books that promise to unlock some secret of leadership, the awards that once meant something but now seem to belong to a different person entirely. The weight you carry changes the way you see everything, even the things that once brought you certainty. Cato lifts a scroll from its place, unrolling it with the careful attention of a man who has learned to find solace in ritual. The words of Zeno stare back at him, the founder of Stoicism, writing about virtue and the good life in a world that seems to reward neither. The goal of life is to live in agreement with nature, the philosopher had written. But what is natural when the very foundations of your world are crumbling? He sets the scroll aside and reaches for another. Chrysippus this time, with his intricate arguments about fate and free will. The old questions that seemed so clear in the bright certainty of youth now carry shadows. If everything is predetermined, what meaning does choice carry? And if we are truly free, why does the weight of decision sometimes feel like carrying stones uphill in the dark? The truth is, Cato has been preparing for this moment longer than he cares to admit. Not this specific night, perhaps, but the reckoning it represents. Every leader who builds something meaningful eventually faces the test that strips away everything except what they truly believe. For some, it comes in a boardroom when the numbers no longer add up. For others, it arrives in the quiet moment when you realize the vision you've been chasing has cost you pieces of yourself you didn't know you were giving away. For Cato, it has taken the form of Caesar's approaching legions and the slow, inexorable collapse of everything he has spent his life defending. The Roman Republic, that grand experiment in shared power and civic virtue, lies broken on the fields of Pharsalus. What remains is this: a handful of cities, a few loyal men, and the question of whether principles can survive the death of the world that gave them meaning. He moves to the window, where the last light of evening paints the rooftops of Utica in shades of amber and gold. Somewhere in those streets, people are ending their day with the small rituals that make life bearable. Sharing meals, telling stories, tucking children into bed with promises that tomorrow will come. They trust, as people always have, that the structures holding their world together are stronger than the forces trying to tear them apart. But Cato knows better. He has seen how quickly certainty can crumble, how the things we take for granted can vanish between one dawn and the next. The republic that seemed as permanent as the 7 hills of Rome has become a memory, replaced by the cult of personality that follows Caesar like a fever. The institutions that once channeled ambition into service now bend to the will of whoever can promise the mob bread and spectacle. This is the burden of seeing clearly. Understanding that the weight you carry is often the only thing standing between order and chaos. Your team looks to you for answers you don't have, for strength you're not sure you possess, for a vision of the future that sometimes feels more like wishful thinking than strategy. And still, you carry it, because someone must. A soft knock interrupts his thoughts. Marcus enters, carrying a simple wooden tray. Bread, olives, a cup of watered wine. The old servant's face carries the kind of weathered dignity that comes from years of faithful service. But tonight, there's something else there. Concern, perhaps, or the recognition that they are living through history, whether they chose to or not. "You should eat, sir," Marcus says quietly, setting the tray on the small table beside Cato's reading chair. "It has been a long day." Cato nods, though food feels like an abstraction right now. Still, the body has its needs, and a leader who neglects the practical details of existence soon finds himself unable to serve any higher purpose. He breaks the bread with deliberate care, tasting the simple grain that has sustained his people for generations. There is something profound in this, the way the most basic acts of living continue even when the world tilts toward chaos. "Tell me, Marcus," he says after a moment, "do you ever wonder if we are fools?" The servant pauses in his arranging of the meal, his hands still. It is not the kind of question a Roman patrician typically asks of his household, but these are not typical times. "Fools, sir? To hold fast to principles when pragmatism might serve us better. Caesar offers amnesty to those who submit. Comfortable exile, perhaps even a place in his new order. Many good men have taken that path. Marcus considers this with the gravity it deserves. I have served in this house for 30 years, he says finally. I have watched you choose the difficult path more times than I can count, not because it served your interests, but because it served something larger than your interests. If that makes you a fool, sir, then the world has too few fools." The words hang in the air between them, carrying more weight than their simplicity might suggest. This is what leadership costs. The loneliness of making choices that others cannot or will not make. The burden of representing something beyond yourself even when that representation demands everything you have to give. Cato sips the wine, feeling its warmth spread through his chest. Outside, the city has settled into full darkness, lit only by the scattered glow of oil lamps and cooking fires. It looks peaceful from here, almost eternal. But he knows that peace is fragile, dependent on the choices made by people like him in rooms like this. The scrolls wait on their shelves, patient as always. Tomorrow there will be more decisions to make, more impossible balances to strike between what is ideal and what is possible. Tonight, though, there is only this, the quiet space between action and consequence, where a man can sit with his thoughts and remember why he began carrying this weight in the first place. The bread tastes of earth and grain, simple and sustaining. The wine carries hints of the vineyard where it was born, the sun and soil that gave it life. These small pleasures remain, even as empires rise and fall around them. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps it has to be. In the flickering lamplight, surrounded by the wisdom of ages, Cato prepares to face whatever tomorrow will demand. The weight he carries has not grown lighter, but his understanding of why he carries it has deepened, and in that understanding there might yet be something worth defending. And a moment of peace. The oil lamp gutters slightly in its bronze holder, casting dancing shadows across the scrolls. Cato rises slowly from his chair, his joints protesting after hours of stillness. The study feels suddenly confining, the weight of accumulated thought pressing against the stone walls like water against a dam. He moves toward the doorway that leads to the courtyard, his sandals whispering against the worn marble floors. Each step carries him away from the philosophical certainties of his books and toward something more immediate, more alive. The night air greets him like an old friend, cool but not cold, carrying the faint salt tang of the distant Mediterranean and the earthier scents of the garden. Above, stars pierce the African sky with a clarity unknown in Rome, where the smoke of a million oil lamps dims even the brightest constellations. You know this feeling, don't you? When the confines of your office or study become too small to contain the magnitude of what you're processing. When you need to step outside, to breathe, to remember that the world extends beyond the immediate circle of your concerns. Sometimes the most profound thinking happens not at a desk, but in the space between walls and sky. Cato's feet find their way along the familiar path toward the fountain at the courtyard's heart. He has walked this route countless times since arriving in Utica, usually in the early morning hours when sleep proved elusive. The fountain was built by some long-forgotten Roman governor, a small luxury in this provincial outpost, a reminder of civilization's reach even at the edges of the known world. The sound reaches him first, water falling in steady rhythm, drop by drop, pool to pool, not the grand cascade of Rome's great fountains, but something more intimate, more honest, the kind of sound that doesn't demand attention but rewards it when given. As he approaches, moonlight catches the water's surface, transforming it into liquid silver. The fountain itself is simple. 3 tiers of carved stone, weathered by years of African sun and wind. Practical rather than ornate, built to last rather than to impress. Cato settles on the stone bench beside it, the marble still holding traces of the day's warmth. For a moment, he simply listens. Water finding its level, gravity doing its patient work. The eternal cycle of rise and fall that governs fountains and empires alike. The sound awakens memories. A younger Cato, barely 20, standing beside another fountain in his uncle's villa outside Rome. The morning sun streaming through olive trees, dappling the water with shifting patterns of light and shadow. His friends gathered around him. Brutus, earnest and idealistic, already showing signs of the moral complexity that would define his later years. Bibulus, quick to laugh but quicker to anger at injustice. And others whose names history has forgotten, but whose faces remain vivid in memory's lamplight. They spoke of the Republic then as something eternal, as fixed and permanent as the stars themselves. They debated philosophy with the confidence of young men who believed that right thinking inevitably led to right action, that principles, once established, would prove unshakable. How simple it seemed. How beautifully, tragically simple. They would serve Rome, they declared. They would uphold the old ways, honor the ancestors, defend the constitution that had guided the Republic through 4 centuries of triumph. They would be worthy of Cincinnatus, who left his plough to save Rome and returned to it when duty was done. They would embody the virtues that made Romans more than mere conquerors. The fountain's gentle murmur seems to echo with their vanished voices. Plans made in sunshine, tested in shadow, ideals forged in peace, broken against the hard realities of power and ambition. But were they broken? Or simply refined? Cato dips his hand into the cool water, watching ripples spread outward from his fingers. Each circle expanding until it reaches the fountain's edge, where it dissipates into stillness. Yet the water itself remains, ready to carry the next ripple and the next. Perhaps that is how principles work, not as rigid structures that stand or fall complete, but as living things that adapt while maintaining their essential nature. The water changes its shape to fit the fountain, but it remains water. The principle bends under pressure, but it remains a principle. He thinks of Marcus, his faithful servant, sleeping somewhere in the villa's quarters. A man who chose loyalty over safety, principle over pragmatism. Who could have fled to Caesar's camp with a reasonable story about serving under duress, but instead chose to remain, to share whatever fate awaits them both. And the soldiers in the garrison, men who could surrender tomorrow with honor intact, their duty discharged by circumstances beyond their control. Yet many will choose to stand, not because they must, but because something in them recognizes that some things matter more than survival. These are not the grand gestures that historians celebrate. No marble monuments will commemorate Marcus's quiet faithfulness or the unnamed soldier's decision to hold his post. But perhaps that makes them more valuable, not less. Perhaps the small choices made in obscurity carry more weight than the great ones made on history's stage. The fountain continues its patient work, cycling the same water through its ancient channels. Rise and fall, fall and rise. Each drop following the path carved by countless drops before it, yet each drop unique in its moment of existence. Cato remembers another conversation years later when the cracks in the Republic had begun to show. Pompey and Caesar circling each other like gladiators, each claiming to defend Rome while preparing to tear it apart. His friends no longer gathered by fountains to debate philosophy. They met in shadowed alcoves to discuss alliances and strategies, their voices hushed with the weight of secrets. We could work with Caesar, Bibulus had suggested, his face drawn with exhaustion. Find some accommodation, save what we can. And what would we save? Cato had replied. The name of the Republic, the forms without the substance, the shell after the soul has fled. Even then, by the fountain in memory, he knew it was a losing argument. Not because his friends lacked courage or principle, but because they carried different weights. Bibulus had a family to protect, estates to preserve, a future to secure for his children. Practical concerns that demanded practical solutions. But Cato had chosen a different burden, the weight of absolute consistency, of being the man who would not bend, who could not compromise, who would rather break than yield. Someone had to carry that weight, he reasoned. Someone had to hold the line, even if, especially if, the line could not hold. The water continues its gentle fall, indifferent to his reflections. Fountain time operates by different rules than human time, measured not in years or decades, but in the patient erosion of stone, the gradual wearing away of edges, the slow work of persistence against permanence. He wonders what this fountain has witnessed. What other men have sat beside it, wrestling with impossible choices? Roman governors facing barbarian invasions, merchants calculating whether to risk another voyage, soldiers writing letters they hoped would never need to be sent, all of them carrying weights invisible to others, all of them trying to balance what they owed to themselves against what they owed to something larger, all of them discovering that the heaviest burdens are often the ones we choose to carry. A nightbird calls from somewhere in the garden, its voice clear and untroubled, life continuing its ancient patterns even as human affairs reach their crescendo of crisis. The bird knows nothing of republics or empires, of Caesar or Cato. It knows only the imperative of its own existence, the simple clarity of survival and song. There is something to envy in that simplicity, and something to reject. For consciousness brings both burden and privilege. The weight of choice, yes, but also the dignity of choosing. The pain of moral complexity, but also the possibility of moral greatness. The fountain's rhythm slows slightly as the night deepens, the water pressure dropping with the late hour. But it does not stop. It continues its work, faithful to its nature, indifferent to the dramas playing out around it. Cato rises from the bench, his moment of peace drawing to a close. Tomorrow will bring Caesar's messengers, demanding surrender. It will bring choices that cannot be unmade and consequences that cannot be avoided. But tonight there is only the fountain's gentle voice and the weight of understanding why some burdens, once accepted, cannot be set down. The water falls, patient and eternal, carrying its quiet lesson into the darkness. Echoes of the past. The fountain's voice fades behind him as Cato walks deeper into his villa, his sandals whispering against the marble floors. The corridors feel different tonight, emptier somehow, as if the very stones understand what approaches with the dawn. He finds himself drawn toward the great banquet hall, though he cannot say why. The massive doors stand open before him, revealing a space that once rang with laughter and heated debate. Now it stretches before him in profound silence, moonlight streaming through the high windows to cast long shadows across the floor. The tables that once groaned under the weight of elaborate feasts stand bare, their polished surfaces reflecting nothing but emptiness. How many evenings had this hall witnessed? How many voices raised in passionate discussion about the Republic's future? Cato steps inside, and the silence seems to swallow his footsteps. The acoustics that once carried every word to the furthest corners now amplify only the sound of his own breathing. He remembers a particular evening. Was it 3 years ago? 4? Time has become fluid in these final days. Brutus had been here, young and earnest, his eyes bright with the same idealism that had once burned in Cato's own heart. They had debated late into the night about Caesar's growing power, about the Senate's weakness, about what it truly meant to serve Rome. "Uncle," Brutus had said. Though they were not blood relations, the younger man had always addressed him thus. Surely there must be a way to preserve what we hold dear without. He had gestured helplessly, unable to finish the thought. Cato had looked at him across the wine cups and oil lamps, seeing himself as he had been decades earlier. Some things, my boy, cannot be preserved by compromise. They can only be honored by our willingness to die for them. The words echo now in the empty hall, hollow and prophetic. Had he known then what he knows now? Perhaps. Perhaps some part of him had always understood that this path led to only one destination. You who carry your own weight of leadership, you understand this feeling, don't you? This sense of standing in spaces that once hummed with possibility, now heavy with the knowledge of what must come. The conference rooms where you've made impossible decisions. The offices where you've had to choose between competing loyalties. The quiet moments when you realize that some burdens, once accepted, reshape everything that follows. Cato moves to where the head table once stood, where he had presided over so many gatherings. The marble beneath his feet is worn smooth by countless footsteps, countless celebrations, countless farewells. He can almost hear the phantom voices of friends and colleagues, their debates about honor and duty echoing across the years. Marcus, Porcius, Cato. They would call him Cato the Younger in the histories to distinguish him from his great-grandfather. But what would those histories say? Would they understand why he chose this path? Or would they see only stubborn pride, the inflexibility of a man who could not bend with the changing times? The thought brings a bitter smile to his lips. History is written by the victors, and Caesar will certainly be victorious. Perhaps future generations will read of Cato as nothing more than an obstacle to progress, a relic of an outdated system that deserved to fall. The possibility should disturb him more than it does. But then, perhaps that is not what matters. Perhaps the only audience that truly counts is the one within his own heart, the tribunal of conscience that weighs every choice against the measure of what is right. The moonlight shifts as clouds pass overhead, and for a moment the hall is plunged into deeper shadow. In that darkness, Cato can almost see them all again. The senators who had fled to safer positions, the friends who had counseled pragmatism, the allies who had found ways to accommodate Caesar's rise. Where are they tonight? Safe in their beds, no doubt, having made their peace with the new order. He does not judge them, not entirely. Survival is a powerful instinct, and compromise often seems the wisest course. But wisdom and rightness are not always the same thing. Sometimes the wise choice is the one that preserves life and position. Sometimes the right choice is the one that preserves something more precious than either. The hall seems to expand around him, its emptiness becoming almost tangible. This is what defeat looks like, he thinks. Not the clash of swords or the thunder of cavalry, but silence where once there was purpose. Empty spaces where once there was meaning. The slow dissolution of everything you have worked to build. Yet, is it truly defeat? Caesar may conquer territories and command legions, but can he conquer the idea of what Rome was meant to be? Can his victory erase the memory of what it means to choose principle over convenience? You know this feeling, don't you? The weight of wondering whether what you're building will outlast the immediate pressures that threaten to crush it. Whether the values you've tried to embed in your work, your team, your legacy will survive the compromises that others might make. Whether standing firm in your convictions serves any purpose beyond your own sense of integrity. Cato walks the length of the hall, his hand trailing along the wall where frescoes depict the great moments of Roman history. Here, Cincinnatus returning to his plough after saving the Republic. There, Horatius holding the bridge against impossible odds. Stories of sacrifice and duty that had shaped his understanding of what it meant to be Roman. But stories change in the telling, don't they? Future painters might depict different scenes on these walls. Caesar crossing the Rubicon, perhaps, the dictator bringing order to chaos, the pragmatist succeeding where the idealist failed. The thought should fill him with despair, but instead he finds a strange peace in it. History will judge as it will judge. His task is not to control that judgment, but to ensure that when it comes, it will find him exactly where he chose to stand. A sound from outside breaks the silence, a night bird calling to its mate, perhaps, or the distant clatter of a cart on the cobblestones. Life continuing its course, indifferent to the great dramas that consume human hearts. There is comfort in that indifference. A reminder that the universe is vast enough to hold both Caesar's ambitions and Cato's principles without choosing between them. He pauses before the great hearth where fires had once warmed these gatherings. Cold ashes now, but he remembers the flames that had danced here, casting flickering light on animated faces as they debated the Republic's future. Those flames are gone, but others will be lit. Other voices will rise in other halls, carrying forward whatever fragments of truth survive the coming darkness. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps it has always been enough. Not to ensure victory, but to ensure continuity. Not to prevent defeat, but to prevent surrender. Not to save the Republic as it was, but to preserve the idea of what a Republic might be. The hall grows colder as the night deepens, and Cato draws his toga more closely around his shoulders. Tomorrow, Caesar's messengers will arrive with their offers of clemency, their promises of position and honor in the new order. They will speak reasonably and persuasively about the futility of resistance, the wisdom of accommodation. And he will listen politely, as befits a Roman senator receiving envoys. He will consider their words with the gravity they deserve, and then he will give them his answer, not in words, for words can be misunderstood or twisted, but in the choice that speaks louder than any rhetoric. The empty hall holds his contemplation without judgment, its silence neither condemning nor absolving. It simply is, as he simply is, as the choice before him simply is. Tomorrow will demand its answer. Tonight allows only preparation. Cato takes one last look around the space that had once been the heart of his household's intellectual life. The debates are ended now. The arguments concluded. What remains is not discussion, but decision, not persuasion, but action. He turns toward the doors, toward the corridor that leads back to his private chambers. Behind him, the hall settles deeper into its silence, holding its memories close. The moonlight continues its slow journey across the floor, marking time's passage with shadows that shift and fade. Some weights, once accepted, cannot be set down. Some halls, once emptied, cannot be filled again. Some choices, once made, echo through centuries. But in the echoing, perhaps there is immortality of a kind. The Stoics resolve. The corridor stretches before him. Familiar stone worn smooth by decades of footsteps. His own, mostly. Though once these halls carried the voices of senators and scholars, friends who believed as he believed that Rome could remain what she had always promised to be. The torches burn lower now, their light painting the walls in amber and shadow. Each step carries him deeper into the quiet heart of his home, where the weight of decision has settled like dust on everything he touches. The servants have withdrawn, not from fear, but from understanding. They know, as he knows, that some moments belong to solitude alone. His study waits as he left it, scrolls arranged with the precision of a man who has always found comfort in order. The lamp still burns, its flame steady despite the night wind that finds its way through the shutters. He settles into his chair. The leather worn to the exact shape of his contemplation, countless hours of reading and thinking carved into its surface like memory itself. The scroll he reaches for bears no grand title, no proclamation of empire or conquest. Simply the words of Zeno, the founder of the philosophy that has shaped every choice, every stand, every moment of principle that brought him to this night. His fingers trace the familiar characters as if greeting old friends. "Virtue is the only true good," he reads aloud, his voice barely disturbing the silence. "External things, wealth, power, even life itself, these are indifferent. What matters is how we respond to them." The words settle into the room like incense, carrying with them the weight of years spent learning what they truly mean, not in the abstract comfort of philosophical debate, but in the crucible of a republic's death, in the choice between bending and breaking. He remembers. A younger self, perhaps 16, standing in his uncle's garden while Sarpedon explained the difference between what we can control and what we cannot. The lesson seemed simple then. Academic, a framework for understanding the world that felt as solid as the marble columns surrounding them. "We cannot control the actions of others," his uncle had said, gesturing toward the busy street beyond the garden walls. "We cannot control the weather, the passage of time, the rise and fall of nations, but we can control our response, our choices, our character." Young Cato had nodded, thinking he understood. Now, decades later, he feels the full weight of that wisdom, how it transforms from comfortable theory into the hardest truth a man can live by. The flame flickers, casting his shadow large against the wall behind him. In that shadow, he sees not just himself, but all the moments that led here. Every time he chose the difficult path over the expedient one. Every time he stood when others sat, spoke when others stayed silent, held firm when others bent with the wind. The morning when he walked barefoot through Rome's streets in winter, refusing the luxury that separated senators from citizens. The afternoon when he spoke for 6 hours straight to prevent a vote that would have enriched his friends but impoverished justice. The evening when he turned down Caesar's offer, gold enough to buy comfort for generations, power enough to shape the world. Each choice had seemed small at the time, a single decision, a moment's stand. But they accumulated like stones in a foundation, building something that could not be moved because it was rooted in bedrock deeper than ambition or fear. He sets the scroll aside and reaches for another. Epictetus this time, the slave who became philosophy's greatest teacher of freedom. The irony has never been lost on him, that a man in chains understood liberty better than those who commanded legions. We were born to work together, the text reminds him. Even those who obstruct our work become our collaborators. They provide the resistance against which we develop our strength. Caesar, obstruction or collaboration? The question would have seemed absurd a year ago. Now it carries a strange comfort. Perhaps even tyranny serves virtue's purpose, providing the weight against which character proves itself unbreakable. The night deepens around him, but he feels no urgency. Time has become something different now. Not a river rushing toward an inevitable sea, but a still pool in which each moment reflects perfect clarity. He has moved beyond the realm where tomorrow's plans matter, into the space where only this moment exists. His training returns to him. Not the political education of rhetoric and law, but the deeper discipline his uncle insisted upon. The daily examination of conscience, the practice of imagining loss until it held no terror, the cultivation of detachment that paradoxically made everything matter more, not less. Rehearse your departure, Epictetus had written. Practice losing everything you think you cannot live without. Only then will you discover what you truly are. How many mornings had he spent in that exercise, imagining the loss of wealth, position, respect, life itself? The practice had seemed morbid to his friends, unnecessary preparation for disasters that might never come. But now he understands its gift. It has made this night feel not like an ending, but like a graduation. He stands and moves to the window, looking out over the city that sleeps unaware of tomorrow's change. Utica spreads below him. Rooftops and courtyards, the harbor where ships rest at anchor, the walls that have protected this place for centuries. All of it will continue after he is gone. All of it will adapt to whatever new order Caesar brings, but some things remain unchanged no matter who holds the throne. The stars still follow their courses, the tide still answers to the moon, and somewhere, in ways he cannot predict or control, the idea that principle matters more than survival will find new voices, new hearts willing to carry its weight. The scroll in his hand contains a passage he has returned to countless times over the years. Zeno's teaching about the sage, the wise man who has achieved perfect virtue. For most of his life, he understood it as an impossible ideal, something to strive toward but never reach. Tonight he reads it differently, not as a description of perfection, but as a recognition of what becomes possible when a man stops trying to be more than human and accepts the responsibility of being fully human. The sage is not someone who never feels fear or doubt or the pull of easier paths. The sage is someone who feels all of these things and chooses virtue anyway. The lamp burns lower, its light growing warmer and softer. He thinks of Marcus, probably sleeping now in the servants' quarters, a good man who chose to stay when he could have fled. Of the friends who died believing the Republic could be saved. Of his daughter, safe in Rome, who will have to make sense of what her father chose and why. Will they understand? Will history remember this as nobility or stubbornness? The questions rise and fall like waves against a shore, but they cannot move the bedrock of his resolve. Understanding would be a gift, but it is not required. Some acts carry their own justification. He returns to his chair and takes up the scroll once more, reading by the failing light, not searching for new wisdom now, but letting familiar truths settle deeper into his bones. The words have become part of him, woven into the fabric of who he is, until there is no separation between the philosophy and the man. Outside, the wind carries the sound of the sea, waves that have been breaking against this shore since before Rome was born, that will continue long after her empire crumbles to dust. There is comfort in that continuity, in being part of something larger than any single life or choice or moment of history. The weight he has carried for so long feels different now, not lighter but perfectly balanced, like a tool crafted for exactly the work it was meant to do. Some men are born to build empires, others to write poetry or lead armies or discover new lands. He was born to hold the line, to be the place where compromise stops and principle begins, to demonstrate that some things matter more than survival, and in doing so, to ensure that they survive. Final preparations. The oil lamp flickers as he moves through his study one final time, its golden light catching the worn spines of scrolls that have been his companions through decades of service. Each text a conversation with minds across centuries, each principle a foundation stone in the republic he has spent his life defending. His sword rests on the wooden table where he has written so many letters, decided so many matters of state. The bronze hilt bears no ornament, no declaration of rank or achievement. It is simply what it was made to be. Functional, honest, without pretense. Much like the man who now lifts it with steady hands. The whetstone moves in slow, deliberate strokes against the blade. Not the hurried preparation of a soldier heading into battle, but the careful attention of a craftsman perfecting his final work. Each pass of stone against steel creates a whisper of sound, a rhythm as ancient as human purpose itself. You understand this kind of preparation, don't you? The quiet moments when you ready yourself for decisions that will define not just your future, but your very identity. When the weight you carry demands perfect clarity about what you're building, and what you're willing to sacrifice to build it well. The blade grows sharper with each stroke, but Cato's face remains serene. There is no anger here, no desperate defiance or theatrical gesture toward posterity. Only the calm focus of a man who has found perfect alignment between his principles and his actions, between who he is and what he must do. Marcus appears in the doorway, drawn perhaps by some instinct that this night is different from all others. The old servant's eyes find the sword, the careful preparation, the unmistakable finality in his master's movements. Understanding passes between them without words, the kind of communication that grows between souls who have shared years of quiet service to something larger than themselves. "Master," Marcus begins, but Cato raises a gentle hand. "No, my friend, no words of dissuasion. We both know what tomorrow brings if I remain." The whetstone continues its patient work. Caesar's mercy would be the cruelest fate of all, to live as a symbol of defeated principle, to become a trophy of pragmatism's victory over virtue. Marcus steps closer, his weathered hands clasped before him. "Then let me speak only of gratitude, for the honor of serving a man who never asked others to bear what he would not carry himself." The words settle into the lamplight like a blessing. Cato pauses in his work, meeting his servant's eyes with the warmth reserved for those who have witnessed our truest selves, who have seen us not in our moments of public triumph, but in the daily choice to remain consistent with our deepest convictions. "The gratitude is mine, Marcus. You could have served any household in Rome, yet you chose to remain with a man whose principles made life more difficult, not easier." He tests the blade's edge against his thumb, sharp enough now for its purpose. That loyalty, that willingness to share the cost of unwavering virtue, it has meant more than any Senate vote or public acclaim. The simple objects around them seem to hold new weight in this moment. The clay cup from which he has drunk water for 20 years, the wooden stylus worn smooth by countless letters, the small bronze lamp that has illuminated so many late nights of service to the Republic. These things will outlast him, will sit tomorrow in the same positions, unchanged by the magnitude of what has transpired here tonight. There is something profoundly comforting in this, the way ordinary objects bear witness to extraordinary moments without themselves being transformed. You know this feeling from your own late hours, how the familiar weight of your phone, the texture of your desk, the quiet hum of your workspace become anchors in moments when the decisions you're making feel too large for any single person to carry. How the simple persistence of everyday things reminds us that courage is often quiet, that the most important choices happen not in grand public moments, but in the privacy of our own commitment to what we believe. Marcus moves to adjust the lamp's wick, a gesture of service performed countless times before. But tonight it carries the weight of ritual, of final preparations being made with love rather than mere duty. "Will you?" Marcus hesitates, then continues. "Will you require anything else tonight, Master?" Cato sets down the whetstone and looks around his study one last time, the scrolls that taught him wisdom, the simple furniture that has supported years of contemplation, the window that has shown him so many dawns, though he will not see another. "Only your prayers, old friend, not for my success, but for my consistency, that when morning comes, Rome will know that some men can still choose principle over survival." that the Republic's ideals need not die simply because its institutions have fallen. He stands, the sword now perfect for its purpose. The weight of it feels right in his hand, not heavy but substantial. Like all tools designed for important work. Go now, Marcus. Rest well. Tomorrow will bring what it brings, but tonight we have done what honor required. The servant bows deeply, a gesture that contains decades of respect and understanding. As his footsteps fade down the corridor, Cato is left alone with the lamp's gentle light, with the sword that will serve its final purpose, with the profound peace that comes from perfect alignment between belief and action. The dawn breaks. The first light of dawn filters through the shuttered windows of the villa, pale and hesitant, as if the sun itself understands the weight of what this day will reveal. Marcus rises before the household stirs. His sleep has been restless, fragments of dreams mixing with the memory of his master's final words. There is work to be done, the simple, necessary work that continues even when the world feels poised on the edge of change. He moves through corridors he has walked for decades, past rooms that hold the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime, toward the study where Cato often greets the morning with his reading. The villa holds that particular stillness that comes just before dawn, when night has not quite released its hold, but day presses gently at the edges of darkness. The study door stands slightly ajar. This is not unusual. Cato often works late into the night, sometimes falling asleep among his scrolls and correspondence. Marcus approaches with the quiet respect of someone who has learned to read the rhythms of another's solitude. He pushes the door open softly, and the world changes forever. Cato lies beside his reading couch, the sword that had gleamed so purposefully in the lamplight now dark with blood. His face holds an expression of profound peace, as if in his final moment he had glimpsed something beyond the reach of earthly compromise. The Stoic texts remain open beside him, Zeno's words about virtue and necessity still visible in the growing light. For a long moment, Marcus cannot move, cannot breathe. This is the end they both knew was coming, the choice his master had carried in his heart like a sacred burden. Yet the reality of it strikes with unexpected force. When the cry finally tears from his throat, when his voice breaks the morning stillness with news that will echo through history, it carries not just grief but something deeper. Recognition, honor, the terrible beauty of witnessing someone choose their principles over their life. The villa erupts into chaos, servants running, voices raised in shock and sorrow, the clatter of sandals on stone as word spreads through every corner of the household. But in the study, in that quiet space where a great man has made his final statement, there remains an island of stillness. The news spreads beyond the villa walls like ripples from a stone cast into still water. Through the streets of Utica, among the citizens who had looked to Cato as their anchor in uncertain times, the word travels with devastating speed. The last true republican is dead. The man who would not bend, who would not compromise, who chose death over submission to tyranny, has spoken his final word. When Caesar receives the news, still days away, but drawing ever closer, his reaction surprises even his closest advisors. There is no triumph in his voice, no satisfaction at the removal of his greatest philosophical opponent. Instead, something that might be called regret, perhaps even respect. "You have robbed me, Cato," he is reported to have said, "of the honor of pardoning you." But those who understood Cato, who had watched him navigate decades of political storms without ever abandoning his course, know better. This was never about Caesar's honor or Caesar's mercy. This was about something far more fundamental, the right of a free man to choose his own end rather than accept the terms dictated by power. In the growing light of that terrible dawn, as Utica mourns and the world prepares to change forever, Cato's final lesson becomes clear. There are some things more important than survival, some principles worth more than life itself, some stands that must be taken, not because they will change the outcome, but because they define who we choose to be when everything else falls away. The weight he carried, the republic he served, the ideals he embodied, these do not die with him. They pass into something larger, something that will outlive empires and emperors alike. Legacy of Utica. They pass into something larger, something that will outlive empires and emperors alike. In the days that follow, word spreads beyond Utica's walls, carried by merchants along dusty trade routes, whispered in the forums of distant cities, spoken with reverence in the quiet corners where free men still gather to remember what the Republic once meant. Caesar himself, when the news reaches him, falls silent for a long moment. His officers wait, expecting perhaps satisfaction or relief that his greatest philosophical opponent has been removed. Instead, they witness something unexpected, a flicker of loss crossing the conqueror's face. For what is a Caesar without a Cato to define the boundaries of his power? What meaning does absolute victory hold when the last voice of principled opposition has chosen silence over submission? The empty streets of Utica at dawn still hold the echo of his footsteps. The fountain in the courtyard continues its gentle murmur, as if carrying forward the conversations that once filled these spaces with the sound of ideas being tested against reality. His study, with its scrolls of stoic wisdom, remains exactly as he left it, the lamp extinguished, but somehow the light of what was contemplated there continues to illuminate the darkness. Years pass, then decades, then centuries. The Roman Empire that Caesar builds, magnificent in its reach, eventually crumbles into dust. The legions that seemed invincible are forgotten. The palaces that housed emperors become ruins for archaeologists to puzzle over. But Cato's choice, made in a single moment of absolute clarity, echoes through the ages like a bell that cannot be silenced. In the quiet chambers where future leaders will wrestle with their own impossible decisions, his example whispers still. When the weight of what you're building seems too heavy to bear, when the easy path beckons with its promises of survival at any cost, when the voice of pragmatism drowns out the quieter call of principle, there is Cato, standing in his study, choosing what matters most. The scrolls he read, the fountain where he found peace, the simple meal shared with a faithful servant, these become more than historical details. They become reminders that greatness is not measured in victories accumulated, but in the moments when we choose who we will be, regardless of the consequences. And so the streets of Utica, empty now in the growing light of this new dawn, hold within their silence something precious and enduring. The weight that Cato carried, the principles he embodied, the final stand he made, these do not end with his death, but begin their true journey, passing from one generation to the next, carried forward by every person who understands that some things, some precious, fragile things, are worth more than survival itself. The sun rises fully now over the ancient city, casting long shadows that will shorten and lengthen and fade. But the shadow cast by one man's choice to remain true to himself, to his principles, to the weight he carried with such dignity, stretches across the centuries, reaching even to you, lying here in the quiet darkness, carrying your own weight, building your own legacy, knowing that you too, when the moment comes, will choose who you are, when everything else falls away.